What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and this weekend sees the Las Vegas Open Championships, the largest yearly event for Warhammer 40k. The LVO Championships traditionally has over 1,000 players. This year is no exception, hosting 1,050 down in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, and represents the absolute leading edge of Warhammer 40k competitive play, since it sees the greatest concentration of top-level players throughout the year, and because of that concentration, the top 8 of LVO is some of the highest competition 40k that we see in the world. So right now, as I'm recording this, the LVO Championships has been reduced to just 8 undefeated players. They have been placed in a single elimination top cut to determine the LVO champion, who is often also crowned as the ITC champion because they tend to gain a ton of additional ITC placement points. And so what I'm going to be doing today is walking through the lists played by these top 8 competitive players. Now, in terms of the factions being played, we see an overrepresentation of Space Marines and Space Marine sub-factions, 2 Ultramarines, as well as a single Deathwatch player and 1 Blood Angels. Now, interestingly, both Deathwatch and Blood Angels are being taken as the classic incarnation of those sub-factions. They're not being played in what is now being termed by the community the dirty variety, where you play no faction-specific units in order to gain the enhanced Oaths of Moment buff that Codex-compliant chapters like Ultramarines will get access to innately. So Deathwatch and Blood Angels are both taking faction-specific units. We also interestingly see a high representation of Chaos Space Marines as well, with 2 Chaos Space Marines in the top 8, as well as 1 Drukhari and 1 Genestealer cult. So let's dive in here, going in ascending order of placement. Sitting at 8th place based on tiebreakers, Derek Apshey is running a Chaos Cult. Derek Apshey is from the 40k Dirtbags YouTube channel and has been playing varieties of the Chaos Cult attachment for months now, essentially since the Codex released. And this list is so skewed that he sees a lot of success with it, because especially in a metagame where players are banking on fighting armies like Ultramarines that are running a lot of potentially Armor of Contempted high armor save models, they're bringing technology that can clear those high save characteristic Marine bodies, which tends to be much lower volume. If you are bringing lots of horde clearing, you also run into problems with real big skew lists. Things like the Ironstorm Spearhead or even the vehicle-focused Gladius Task Force style Space Marine lists, as well as armies like Imperial or Chaos Knights. So it's very rare from a metagame standpoint that you have both the activation count and attack volume to clear out armies like these Chaos Cults. Now, as a bit of a refresher, let's talk about for a moment exactly what Chaos Cult does, because it has been a couple months since we've discussed it on the channel. Chaos Cult is a damned unit-focused detachment for Chaos Space Marines. It gives you access to the Battleline keyword on your Trader Guardsman squads and gives you huge bonuses to things like Accursed Cultists, Trader Guardsmen, and Cultist units. It makes these units faster by allowing them to perform what is called a Desperate Pact, essentially a separate variety of Dark Pact that you can use to speed your models up. That makes it excellent at putting tons and tons of very cheap high OC models all over the table and competing for primary objective, but if it needs to, it also has ways to supercharge their damage output. You can use Desperate Pacts in addition to stratagems like Chosen for Glory to get full hit and wound rerolls on your units, Infernal Sacrifice for additional strength and attacks, and additional strength and AP from Crazed Focus. This allows you to trade up with these extremely cheap light infantry units, and since you're spamming so many of them around the table, as long as you can take out the pieces in your opponent's army that can reliably kill these large units, most armies become unable to deal with the volume of incoming attacks. So what does the army actually include? We have Cypher for a lone operative character, as well as, importantly, a CP tax aura, so that we can mess with fights in the middle of the table. We have a Dark Apostle with the Amulet of Tainted Vigor, which allows you to return destroyed models back to the unit. That's important because oftentimes you'll be losing additional models thanks to those Desperate Pacts. The Dark Apostle also will grant his unit +1 to wounded melee, so they are already hitting fairly hard. We have then 2 Dark Communes to attach into Accursed Cultist units. One of them is running the Incendiary Goad for an additional +1 strength and attacks if you are below starting or half strength respectively. The other one with Warped Foresight to return Scout to his unit. The Dark Communes, in fact, do not have Scout on their datasheet, despite the fact that they attach into units that do, which means that they'll actually remove it from their attached unit, but Warped Foresight will grant them that back. Last and certainly not least, we have Fabius Bile as a bit of a lone character. He's just incredibly difficult to kill and can act as the utility unit that also hits fairly reasonably in melee. From there, we have hordes and hordes of cultists. This includes 4 10-man units of standard cultists, 6 10-man units of traitor guardsmen. These guys add a little bit of additional shooting power to the army with melta guns and plasma guns, but they're also just kind of sticky to remove, gaining cover when they're touching objectives. We have a Chaos Rhino to ferry some of these guys to the fight, as well as just to act as a slightly higher toughness utility unit. These guys are actually very useful for performing actions or holding down objectives, and are mostly immune to a lot of the light anti-infantry shooting that you'll need to take to be able to defeat this army. We have 3 units of 16 accursed cultists in order to attach the Dark Apostle as well as those Dark Communes, and then some demonic allies. This includes a unit of Demonettes, a unit of Nurglings to give yourself some midboard control with infiltration, and Celeste to act as another utility unit. That gives the army 1 lone operative character and 2 regenerating characters between Celeste and Fabius Bile. So we have a lot of little independent units that can go around and perform actions while your guardsmen and cultists are performing desperate pacts to swarm objectives. And your accursed cultists are keeping your opponent pinned in their deployment zone and actually doing significant damage to them. Overall, this archetype's been proven to work extremely well in the past. It has so many independent units and activations that it's super difficult to compete with it on your primary objectives. So it's no wonder that we're seeing it achieve success. Next up, we're going to move over to Floof Cox, which I hope is this player's actual name because that's incredible. Floof is running Genestealer Cult and is coming in at 7th place. The detachment that Floof is running is a host of Ascension. This is the evolution of the original Index detachment that focuses very heavily on units coming out of reserve and ambushing their opponents. This includes 3 Beneficti, who will grant the ranged weapons in their unit lethal hits. You can combo that very nicely with Primed and Readied, a stratagem that improves your unit's critical hits to 5 instead of 6. And it allows you to source a ton of potential lethal hits with the high volume, although low impact shooting from your Neophyte hybrid squads. We also then have a Primus with a chink in their armor to similarly grant lethal hits to his unit when they arrive on the battlefield. The Primus is then also granting you hit rerolls, so you have an even greater chance at fishing for those successful lethal hits. And lastly, we have a Reductus Saboteur to act as a forward operator. From there, we have an Acolyte Hybrid Auto Pistol Squad to give the army a little bit of melee counterpunch, as well as a bunch of Handflamer Acolyte Hybrid Squads, and 6 units of Neophyte Hybrid, 5 units of 20, as well as a smaller unit of 10. Those characters are going to attach into those. Each one of them is running a combination of grenade launchers, mining lasers, seismic cannons, and webbers, although we do have one of them equipped with a lot of anti-infantry shooting, flamers, and heavy stubbers, in addition to seismic cannons. Those are going to get the benefits of potentially those extended criticals from the stratagem, as well as the lethal hits from their attached characters. They're going to jump out of reserve, also gain that sustained hits and ignore cover from the detachment ability, and do tremendous damage. They're being supported by 3 individual Achilles Ridge Runners. Each of those is equipped with a heavy mortar and a survey auger. That's going to be able to remove cover as well as add +1 AP to whatever they shoot at, and they can fire indirectly. And in order to set up for this Doom drop, we have 3 units of Pure Strain Genestealers that can push up the table and clear out enemy screens in the early game. They can operate alongside that Reductus Saboteur to try to kill the units that will prevent the optimal positioning for the Neophyte Hybrid bricks once those guys arrive. As we just talked about with the Chaos Cult, armies like these can be difficult to deal with from a metagame perspective because not every faction has the attack volume they need to be able to kill 150 Genestealer Cult infantry. And even more difficult is that these Genestealer Cult infantry always get the opportunity to alpha strike you. They're going to start in reserve, jump on the table, and absolutely devastate you with all of the benefits that they get from setting up off the table, plus the character attachments, plus just their massive number of attacks. And given the fact that we have multiple instances of things like Achilles Ridge Runners, so we can actually buff multiple Neophyte Hybrid units all at the same time, this army can deliver such an alpha strike that many armies are totally incapable of recovering after the smoke has cleared. An interesting question to ask with these new varieties of Genestealer cults is what exactly we are recovering with the updated version of the Cult Ambush. We can get an additional Neophyte Hybrid Squad for 6 Resurgence points, but we can also just be constantly regenerating the smaller Acolyte Hybrid units. The 5-man Acolyte Hybrid units come back with only 2 Resurgence points, meaning that you can gain an additional 5 units of those over the course of the game as they're destroyed. So the Neophyte hybrids could potentially be act as the Alpha Strike, come in and absolutely devastate your opponent's heavier targets with those lethal hits. Then you can skirmish with them with the Acolyte hybrids for the entirety of the game, essentially playing with 10 units of Acolyte hybrids as they constantly respawn. And that moves us over to the first of our Space Marine Masters. This is Mark Hurdle playing Deathwatch. Now, Mark Hurdle is a Space Marine master. He will play absolutely wild varieties of Space Marines, basically regardless of the metagame. He'll find a way to make power armored units work, and he has played Deathwatch in the past, even at the time where they were the worst faction in the game. But now that they have the new access to their brand new index, thanks to the Grotsmith's release, as well as an updated variety of Black Spear Task Force, Deathwatch are looking pretty spicy, and Mark Hurdle is making the best of it. So he is playing a Black Spear Task Force, none of this Librarius Conclave technology that we've been seeing from Deathwatch more recently. They have incredible synergy with this detachment, with the ability to teleport around the table and improve their weapon statistics using their specialist ammunition, and this army is making the most of that. This includes a Gravis armored captain with a Tome of the Ectoclades. Having one or more captains in the army is absolutely vital for Deathwatch, since it gives you the ability to either use Rites of Battle to discount the cost of special issue ammunition stratagems on his unit, but it also gives you the opportunity to use the Teleportarium stratagem for free. As long as the captain's unit is one of the two that you select as the target of the stratagem, you can select an additional kill team target and bring them along for no additional cost. So it essentially turns you into a modicum of a Grey Knight's Teleport Strike Force, where basically for 0 CP, you're going to be redeploying 2 of your kill teams around every turn. We then have a Judiciar with the Thief of Secrets to improve his strength AP and damage, and further improve that once he starts killing models. And given the fact that he is giving his unit fight first, he has the opportunity to kill models pretty effectively once battle is joined. We have a combi weapon lieutenant as well as a standard Watchmaster. The interesting thing about the Watchmaster is that currently he has access to an additional incarnation of Rites of Battle that is not actually Rites of Battle, meaning that it can be usable in addition to your standard Rites of Battle, giving you access to 2 free stratagems a turn. And given how absolutely strapped Deathwatch are for command points, having access to that second free stratagem is huge. Now, with that, we have 3 units of Deathwatch veterans, 2 units of 5, as well as a unit of 10. These guys are embarking into Rhinos and are attaching alongside the Judiciar and the Watchmaster. I imagine the Watchmaster is going to attach to the larger unit of 10 veterans and give them his ability to advance and charge, as well as potentially giving them free access to things like special issue ammunition on their frag cannons and Infernus heavy bolters. Interestingly, because the Deathwatch veterans count as Stern Guard veterans for the purposes of attaching, the Judiciar can attach to them despite being a Tacticus armored character, and because of the Space Marine Rhinos clause that allows Tacticus characters to embark into them as long as they're attached to firstborn units, the Judiciar can actually ride around in that Rhino in addition to the Deathwatch veteran squad that he's jumping into. Otherwise, these veteran squads are equipped with heavy weapons as well as Deathwatch Thunderhammers. From there, we have 2 units of Deathwatch Terminators. These guys add a little bit of resilient utility and some solid backline shooting to the army. Deathwatch Terminator squads can equip up to 3 Cyclone missile launchers in addition to their other weapons, giving you access to, for only 180 points, potentially 6 D6 damage missile launcher shots on a fairly resilient platform with a bunch of wounds and a 4+ invulnerable save that's difficult to interact with, which allows them to kind of wander around and apply pressure to the opponent in the early game. Then we have an Indomitor kill team. These guys are kind of the powerhouse of the new index. They gain an additional 2 strength when they're targeting the closest legal target. This brings a lot of their high impact heavy bolt weapons to strength 7. And when you start adding additional bonuses like AP buffs or ignore cover from your special issue ammunition, and even +1 to wound from the Storm Speeder Thunder Strike that's also in the list, these guys get absolutely lethal at a super duper long range. You can improve the range of their heavy bolt rifles up to 36, as well as their melta weapons even up to 24. This unit in particular is equipped with 2 heavy bolters, 2 melta rifles, 1 multi-melta, 2 heavy bolt rifles, and then 3 aggressors with flamestorm gauntlets. That adds a little bit of additional melee punch to the unit. One downside that Deathwatch have is an inability to fall back after they're engaged and still operate normally. So having good melee in your unit to allow yourself to extricate yourself from random enemy models engaging you helps a lot. If you don't have any special melee weapons in units like these Indomitor kill teams, oftentimes like 5 Space Marine scouts can go engage them, and there's no way that they can punch themselves out of melee before it comes back to your turn. But having 3 sets of Twin Linked Power Fists in the unit helps quite a bit. The Gravis Captain will also help here as well. He's equipped with a Mastercrafted Power Weapon as well as a Mastercrafted Bull Rifle, which will give you a couple of those additional high-value melee attacks. We then have a Talon Strike kill team. This is equipped with 5 Assault Bolters. These guys are excellent in combination with the Tome of the Ectoclades because you can get access to once per game a second target for Oaths of Moment to give yourself hit rerolls against, and those Assault Rope Bolters go absolutely insane once you're getting hit rerolls. Alongside the Storm Speeder's Thunderstrike that's also in the list that can give you +1 to wound against monsters and vehicles. The Assault Bolters go absolutely ham once they're wounding on 5s, since you're just full rolling into those successful results. Talon Strike kill teams will gain an additional AP when they drop onto the battlefield, so that brings the Assault Bolters up to a base of AP 2, and you can stack either Ignore Cover or +1 AP from your special issue ammunition on top of those, making them good at killing a wide variety of targets. They're good at dealing with both high volume units because of their sustained 2, and high wound count units thanks to their 2 damage and Twin Linked. Deathwatch overall are a very finesse-oriented army. You don't have many units to play with. This army is essentially composed of 2 kill teams and 2 units of Deathwatch Terminators, in addition to some veterans hanging out in the back as well. So the army plays on an absolute knife's edge. But if you are good at playing around with these big bricks, which Mark Hurdle has proven time and time again to be adept at, it is easy to see success with a list like this. I especially like the Storm Speeder Thunderstrike in the army to kind of ape the +1 to wound that Deathwatch don't get access to, being a Codex non-compliant chapter, and making units like those Talon Strike kill teams significantly better at dealing with vehicles. From there, we're going to move on to another non-compliant chapter, Blood Angels. Jack Harpster is playing Blood Angels in a fairly non-standard detachment. While we've seen Liberator Assault Group time and time again since the release of the supplement, Jack from our Team Art of War is playing a brand new detachment from Grodsmiths, the Angelic Inheritors. Now, it's a bit of a refresher. Angelic Inheritors is a character-focused detachment for Blood Angels. It gives you a lot of really interesting utility, giving you the choice of 2 out of 3 enhancements for all character units in your army. That includes independent characters as well as units with attached characters. This includes the ability to fall back, shoot, and charge for free, reroll hit and wound rolls of 1, as well as reroll advance and charge rolls for free. Now again, these affect all your character units, but only your character units. Any unit without an attached character will gain no benefit from your detachment ability. Now this sounds amazing and is in combination with some very strong utility stratagems like Into the Burning Skies, giving you access to an uppy downy for your jump pack units. Absolutely phenomenal for large ranged bricks like Inceptors, as well as Shadow of Great Wings to give your characters a version of Lone Operative. The downside in comparison to detachments like Liberator Assault Group is a lack of consistent benefits for your other units. Detachments like Liberator will grant bonuses to your entire army regardless of whether or not they have captains attached into them, as well as improving your threat range with access to advance and charge. And you're giving that up for the flexibility of Angelic Inheritors. But clearly Jack Harpster feels like that trade-off is worth it. Now, what is he playing in the army? This army includes 2 captains with jump packs, as well as Commander Dante, a standard librarian, a combi weapon lieutenant with ordained sacrifice. This is a 25-point enhancement that gives him access to a 2+ respawn once per game, meaning that this guy is incredibly hard to deal with. Not only is he a lone operative, but also has his reactive move built in all the time, and even if you're able to lock that down, he can still potentially stand back up after being killed. Last and certainly not least, we have the Sanguinor. He has incredible synergy with this detachment, thanks to his ability to redeploy out of melee, unlike other units. From there, we have an Intercessor squad, a Las Cannon Devastator squad, as well as 2 Inceptor squads, 1 3-man with Assault Bolters to act as a little bit more of a utility unit and clear out lighter enemies, as well as a 6-man with Plasma Exterminators. These guys are excellent with access to that uppy downy that allows them to potentially even just start on the table and then start using their close deep strikes from the bottom of turn 1 onwards, meaning that your opponent is never safe from these Inceptors coming in and killing their valuable targets. If you're able to get really oblique angles with them and peel out enemy units that would otherwise be blocking your other deep strikers or your other jump pack units, you could potentially be reusing this Inceptor squad multiple times per game, and if that's the case, you're gaining so much value from them that it's difficult to come back from. We then have a standard Infiltrator squad, as well as 3 units of 3 Sanguinary Guard to attach these jump pack characters and Commander Dante, alongside 2 Vindicators for some backline shooting. Now, the Devastator squad is likely going to be the home of that Librarian. He's going to give them access to not only a 4+ invulnerable save, but also reroll once to hit and wound from the detachment ability, which dramatically improves the consistency of that Devastator unit and gives you access to a solid long-range anti-tank option that you could use in place of committing your Vindicators or your Plasma Exterminators. It's really cool to see Angelic Inheritors seeing some success. I think that this detachment was a little underwhelming in comparison to Liberator Assault Group when it first released, but it does seem like the ability to peel out enemy screening units and constantly be rapid ingressing Sanguinary Guard squads with very strong consistency from their attached characters and rerolls from the detachment ability, that you could manufacture some success from it. Now, moving on, we're going to talk about the last of our Xenos armies in the top 8 here. Ridvan Martinez, aka Skari, from the Scardcast YouTube channel, is currently undefeated with a Skysplinter Assault version of Drukhari. Skari is playing an Archon with the Nightmare Shroud to prevent his unit from being overwatched, as well as a Beastmaster to give him some midboard control with that high wound count and long scout. We then have both Lilith Hesperax and Urian Rakarth. Lilith is attaching into a unit of witches. Urian does have some rack units he can attach into, but oftentimes he also just hangs out by himself because he does have a respawn and he is extremely difficult to kill independently. And then we have a unit of Kabalite warriors alongside a Court of the Archon. The army is including 2 Venoms and a Raider for its transports. This allows it to split units like the Kabalite warriors and the witches in half thanks to the Venom's ability, and then attach the Court of the Archon to the heavy weapon half of those Kabalite warriors alongside the Archon and embark inside that Raider to create the full Archon brick. This is going to allow your heavy weapons to disembark from the Raider, get access to their sustained hits, and ignore cover from the Skysplinter Assault detachment ability and stratagems, and full hit and wound rerolls from the Archon's attachment ability. In addition to the shooting from the court, these guys act as a fairly resilient unit already, and can also put out some pretty significant damage at shooting as well. We then have 2 Chronos to regenerate pain tokens, a unit of Grotesques just to act as a little bit of a bulwark to hold down objectives, 2 units of Mandrakes for utility, 2 units of Scourges for some long-range shooting, 1 equipped with Haywire Blasters and 1 equipped with Dark Lances, a unit of Talos for some late-game counterpunch. You guys can act as a tough kind of anchor for the army. After your opponent has skirmished with the transport equipped units in the early game, the Talos can come in and kind of clean them out in the late game. And last, but certainly not least, a Void Raven Bomber. The Void Raven Bomber did just get a points increase thanks to its popularity in Skysplinter Assaults, but obviously that has not dissuaded Skari from playing them. It offers you a ton of pretty decent impact attacks, including a ton of shots from its dark sides at 2 damage to clear out medium and heavy infantry bodies, as well as a bunch of modal missile launcher shots. That gives the army some ranged punch, as well as a way to reach out and interact with units that would otherwise be hiding from the Scourges in a way that Drukhari doesn't really have otherwise access to. We've seen varieties of these Skysplinter Assault lists for a really long time, and I know we've talked about Skari and this list recently because he has seen some recent competitive success with it, so I don't know if there are too many surprises here. Similarly, we are going to start talking about Ultramarine list, and there are not too many surprises there as well. Coming in at 3rd place, Ben Neal is running an Ultramarines Vanguard Spearhead variety of the faction. Interestingly, his army is not including Robute Gilliman, so he doesn't have access to the double oath that many Ultramarine armies have been utilizing up until this point. However, that does give him a higher model count because Robute Gilliman is, of course, very expensive for what he gives you. He also doesn't have too many synergies with Vanguard Spearhead explicitly, so if there was a detachment to drop him out of, it probably would be this one. Ben is taking a jump pack captain with the Ghost Weave cloak. This guy's equipped with a Power Fist, and that cloak gives him lone operative, so he's able to act as a little bit of an independent operator, running around the table, performing actions, and clearing out enemy utility units, as well as just being generally a nuisance. He can even use the reactive move in response to charging that the detachment has to make him difficult to pin down, using his Rights of Battle. We have a Combi Weapon Lieutenant with Shadow War Veteran to grant that guy a CP tax aura, Marneus Calgar to generate CP for himself, as well as Uriel Ventress. Interestingly, we do not have a blade-driven deep unit, so we don't have access to that infiltrating Marneus Calgar that oftentimes we see in Vanguard Spearhead, but we do have 2 overlapping CP tax auras between Uriel Ventress and the Shadow War Veteran Combi Weapon Lieutenant. On top of that, we have an Impulsor to embark Uriel Ventress and a unit of company heroes into, The big Centurion Devastator squad, these equipped with las cannons and Centurion missile launchers. This is basically a staple for Vanguard Spearhead at this point. These guys are going to be able to redeploy around the table, gain deep strike from Uriel Ventress, and take acute line of sight angles onto opposing units, trying to keep themselves out of line of sight, and gaining +1 ballistic skill and +1 AP from strike from the shadows, alongside their baked-in rerolls, both from their twin-linked weapons and their own hit rerolls, to very consistently kill enemy hard targets. We have a company hero squad for Marnius Calgar as well, in addition to 2 individual Eradicator squads, 3 Inceptor squads, 2 3-man with Plasma Exterminators, and 1 5-man with Assault Bolters. Having an Assault Bolter squad in this capacity is really interesting. Being able to gain +1 AP from the Strike from the Shadows stratagem is a huge buff for these Assault Bolters, and it gives the army a little bit of horde clear that they wouldn't normally have access to. But in addition to that, the +1 to wound from the Ultramarine Osa moment makes these Assault Bolters go absolutely insane, essentially as we've talked about in Mark Hurdle's Deathwatch list. If you can set them up in a position where your opponent doesn't benefit from cover, or you can otherwise strip cover from them, adding any sort of AP buff to Assault Bolters makes them go nut. Once they're wounding enemies on 5s with full hit and wound rerolls, they start to do absolutely disgusting things to basically any target. Inceptors also have a special synergy with this detachment as well, because you can start them on the table and, very much like Angelic Inheritors or Deathwatch, potentially uppy downy them from the start of the game and start clearing out your opponent with these Inceptor drops from the bottom of turn 1. We then have a little bit of utility in the form of an Infiltrator squad as well as a Scout squad. Overall, this isn't too different than most of the Ultramarine Vanguard Spearheads that we've been seeing crop up in the past. The absence of Rabute Gilliman in exchange for additional deep striking infantry is very interesting, but I think it makes a ton of sense. I do think it also points to the fact that Inceptors are potentially a little bit of a problematic unit with this +1 to wound buff. The fact that they also got a points cut in the December update was kind of unexpected and incredibly powerful, making this unit ubiquitous in a lot of varieties of Space Marines. And especially with the synergy that they have already with Vanguard Spearhead in particular, it's no wonder that we're seeing them played at a very high rate. From there, we're going to move back down to Chaos Space Marines for potentially one of the most creative lists in this top 8. Jay Eggett is running a tank-focused variety of Chaos Space Marines that's taking a ton of demon engines and the weird vehicles that Chaos Space Marines have access to. But it's not a Soulforged war pack, as you may expect. Instead, Jay is playing none other than Pactbound Zealots. This is the index detachment that gives you access to enhanced dark pacts based on the god that you're worshiping. And this army is going to be focused very heavily on Nurgle worship. In fact, almost every single unit in the army has the mark of Nurgle. This gives it access to 5+ critical hits when these units dark pact for sustained hits in the shooting phase. And in addition to Hellbrutes, this can also give you both critical hit triggers on that critical hit of a 5+. So these massive bricks of tanks can be getting both lethal and sustained with high impact anti-tank weapons on the roll of a 5-up. This is not the first time we've seen a variety of Chaos Space Marines like this. The damage output from this combination is incredible. Oftentimes we see it alongside Abaddon in order to give hit rerolls to confirm those 5-up critical rolls. But today we're just using those points instead for more vehicles, which I guess has kind of the same effect. This includes a Warpsmith as well as a Cultist mob for utility alongside 2 units of Chaos Bikers, and then an insane number of vehicles. 3 Nurgle Predator Destructors with autocannon turrets and las cannon sponsons, 3 Nurgle Chaos Vindicators, 2 Nurgle Hellbrutes, those guys equipped with twin las cannons, and 2 Nurgle Venom Crawlers for a little bit of lower impact, higher volume shooting. Last and certainly not least is something coming out of left field here, 2 Slaaneshi Maulerfiends. Now, the Chaos Space Marine Maulerfiend is not really something that has seen play since, I would say, probably the beginning of the edition. These are relatively fast melee vehicles, coming with a Strength 14 AP2 D6 +1 damage fist attack, and these ones have also equipped 6 extra attack Lasher Tendril swings. Now, the benefit of Slaanesh here is that they get access to Advance and Charge, and some additional efficiency in melee, with access to 5+ critical hits when dark pacting for sustained hits. This gives the army a little bit of melee counterpunch that they can use to punish enemies that move aggressively forward and try to engage the otherwise unassailable brick of Chaos Space Marine armor that's hammering shots downrange. This army is awesome. This is definitely very different than we've seen in the past. We have seen varieties of these Nurgle Mark of Chaos armies alongside the Hellbrute combos previously, but it's been months and months since they've seen competitive success, and a lot of times they are not necessarily quite as straightforward as this army that we're seeing Jay play. The introduction of units like Venom Crawlers and Maulerfiends as well gives the army a lot more flexibility and is also just really cool. These are not units that have seen play basically since the edition began, and it's awesome to see them on competitive tabletops, especially at the level of competition that the Las Vegas Open is showcasing. This army is really cool. Low-key, I'm rooting for Jay, and to be honest, his results have been incredible so far. 4 100-point wins, a 95, and a 99-point win. So we'll see if he can keep up that consistent showcase. And with that, let's move on to our top seed moving into the top cut. And this is going to be one that's very familiar if you watched my coverage of the Nottingham GT last week. Josh Roberts is currently undefeated with his Ultramarine Gladius task force. Now, Josh Roberts was in the top cut of the Nottingham GT with a very similar version of this Gladius task force list. So a lot of the stuff that I discussed in my video last week about his army is going to continue through. So what exactly is he playing? He's playing a Captain in Gravis armor alongside the Artificer armor enhancement to make that guy significantly difficult to kill. He has access to his own built-in rights of battle, so he can reduce incoming AP with Armor of Contempt for free, or even use free reactive moves, alongside having a 2+ armor save, having incoming damage, and a 5+ feel no pain, thanks to that Artificer armor enhancement. This guy just acts by himself, wanders around the table, and is ridiculously difficult to kill for his points value. In addition to having 7 melee attacks between his Power Fist and his Relic Blade, he can also kill enemy utility units and just be a nuisance throughout the game. Speaking of nuisances, we also have a Combi Weapon Lieutenant who can either act as a lone operative to hold down objectives or complete secondaries, or just staple himself to Robute Gilliman to give Gilliman a permanent lone operative as well. We also have Marnius Calgar, who is going to attach into a unit of company heroes. In addition, we have an Assault Intercessor squad. These guys don't have any character attachments with them, but they are going to act as a little bit of a nice utility unit for only 75 points and getting wound rerolls targeting enemies on objectives. And they're able to go in and clear out lighter enemy units and are a good outlet for Assault Doctrine, which the army often doesn't use until very late in the game. We then have 2 Ballistus Dreadnoughts. These guys have some additional synergy with Gladius Task Force, since getting ignore cover from Storm of Fire is actually huge for them. Their AP value is kind of middling, especially for Space Marine shooting, so being able to punch through those cover makes them a lot more consistent. We have a Gladiator Reaper to give the army a little bit of additional infantry sweeping. I wonder if one takeaway that Josh Roberts had from his experience at the Nottingham Super Major was a need for some anti-infantry shooting in the army, and their Gladiator Reaper certainly provides that, with that twin-linked heavy onslaught Gatling cannon getting sustained hit 2 when targeting infantry units. So once you're Oath of Momenting a target, this thing is just going to scythe down low armor save enemies, or even pile a little bit of damage onto high armor save enemies thanks to its devastating wounds. We have an Incursor squad to buff up the shooting with +1 to hit, alongside an Infiltrator squad for utility and to protect the central brick of vehicles from enemy deep strikers, as well as 3 Vindicators to follow up the rear. This variety of Gladius Task Force is essentially a 2+ armor save skew. We're going to be forcing the combination of 2 Ballistus Dreadnoughts and 3 Vindicators down our opponent's throat, alongside ample use of Smokescreen and Armor of Contempt from the free stratagems and CP gained by both Marnius Calgar and Robute Gilliman. With the smaller units like the Assault Intercessor squads and the Captains acting as utility and skirmishing with enemies, anything that commits heavily into these Vindicators is going to then have to deal with a counterpunch from either them or Marnius Calgar. Anything that can then deal with Marnius Calgar, who, when attached with the company heroes, is exceptionally difficult to kill, will then also have to deal with Robute Gilliman. By the time you're at that game state, the game is likely over, and the Space Marine player has won. Josh Roberts has already showcased that this variety of Space Marines is successful, and obviously with his placement in the top seed of the LVO championships currently, with a total of 5 100-point wins on his record, dropping only 15 points over the course of 6 games, it's obviously showing its power moving on into the upcoming quarterfinals. And with that, that is a breakdown of the top 8 of the LVO championships. As I mentioned before, this is the absolute bleeding edge of the 40k metagame, and these are armies that I would expect to see played fairly consistently moving on into the future. Let me know down in the comment section what you think about these armies. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise and helps me make this content, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.